Hey podcast fam, are you a current Amazon bookseller? Are you tired of spending endless hours in thrift stores, bookstores, and libraries, book sales looking for profitable inventory? Want to source in your pajamas? KRM Wholesale offers a custom list of profitable books you can source from your computer. The items can be shipped to you, or our teams will prep and send the items into Amazon on your behalf. Take your Amazon business to the next level with no upfront charges or fees. Ready to get started? Visit kingsridgemedia.com/wholesale to get started today.
You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
And Gavin, we're back again. And I'm guessing you have some updates on... Sounds like you went down a little bit of a rabbit hole in planning your podcast.
Yes,
Is that correct?
I did.
You want to talk about that a little bit? Or?
Sure. I was going to bring it up briefly. So, yeah, I think we talked about this on the regular podcast last time.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. I don't think this was an off recording thing. Well, anyway, so I wanted to kind of get an idea of what the pace was and if the pace should be adjusted. Part of this is just because sometimes I can't tell if we're going too slow, going too fast. I'm not sure. And then there was the Patreon comment that like, hey, really get to the meat and potatoes. And that didn't really affect me, but it was enough where I'm like, well, somebody cares. and so I was like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to readjust this. And I'm going to put what I think is going to be the end date of the timeline. And then reverse back to today, divide it up, and decide how many episodes per timeline year there will be.
Okay.
And when I first did the math actually said, you could slow down a little bit. And I said, no. That's not the answer I want. So I readjusted my numbers. and now it's set at 4 episodes per timeline year. And I think it's going to be pretty firm because I took a notebook. I kind of wrote out some of the things I want to cover in that time. So this will be the second episode of 1966. And if there's anything that comes up in the timeline that we don't get to, that will get thrown over to the Patreon. And I want to be very clear with people. You do not need to subscribe to the Patreon to get all the stuff you need to know. If it's something that I kick over there, it's not a big part of the timeline. It's just not like something I'm going to refer to in the next episode.
Mm-hmm. You're not missing anything other than just maybe a little story that other people will get to hear, basically.
Yeah, so I'm going through, and there's so much stuff I do with the notes. Like right now, we're up to 1966, and between 1900 and 1965. I've got 120 pages of notes I didn't use.
Wow.
So there's a lot of material that doesn't make the final cut. But yeah, there'll be things like, I'd like to talk about the Scene nightclub. It's not really super important to the main timeline. It's because there's nothing criminal going on there. But people might be curious to know what kind of bands played there. So that's something we could move over to the Patreon, and it won't detract in any way from the podcast, but it'll give the Patreon members something a little extra. As long as I mentioned it, Patreon, $2 a month. It's very cheap. You get 2 extra episodes a month for $2, and I'm pretty confident that you also get the entire back library too.
You do.
So if you want to pay your $2, download all 50 episodes, 60 episodes, whatever it is. I don't even know how many episodes we got on there.
You shouldn't really say that because I'm not 100% sure you can download it from there.
Okay, well, whatever. If you want to just breeze through all those Patreon episodes, decide, nope, you can cancel immediately. You got all of that for $2. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying you can.
He's encouraging you not to do that. But if you do that...
It's a low-risk investment. That's all I'm saying.
So now I'm curious. So there's 150 pages of notes.
120, yeah.
Or whatever, between...
Maybe 125.
Like, from pretty much the beginning of the Mafia to to about 65.
Yeah.
That you were never touched. Like, are those that you just didn't fit them in, or is it just basically...
A lot of it's just pointless stuff. It's things like the FBI monitoring funerals and writing down who was at a funeral and things like that. There's no good way to work that into an episode.
Okay.
So it's not, I didn't skip anything important. It's just a lot of the stuff that, when the Mafia is, or not the Mafia, when the FBI is following the Mafia for like years.
There's a lot of boring stuff.
There's a lot of boring stuff. There's like.
There's a lot of dead ends.
There's like, oh, here's some people he called. Here's some whatever. And I make note of that because if it later on is relevant, well, then I have that in the notes. But most of the time, the stuff they write down doesn't end up going anywhere. So,
gotcha.
So it's not like there's 120 pages of pure gold sitting there. It's not. I assure you.
Like I'm sitting here thinking, like, oh my god, have we only heard half of the story from 19? But no, we just haven't heard who went to every funeral that happened from 1900 to 1965, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's just not. I mean, if somebody got killed, we covered it. Like, it didn't skip the big stuff, I promise.
All right, so what are we talking about then today?
So today, I call this episode, I got a fancy title here. I got Balistrary Taxes, The Bug Blowout.
Okay. The Bug Blowout?
The Bug Blowout.
I'm assuming that's a tap?
Yes.
Wiretap? Okay.
Yes. And normally I try to keep things my notes to 4 pages. This actually runs over to the 5th page a little bit. So I apologize if this is a longer episode. I'm trying to keep it short, but there was no way around it.
This is the meat and potatoes.
This is the meat and potatoes.
So.
This is the one that I know people are going to want to hear.
Yeah.
So are we going to go?
Go.
All right. So I just want to clear up right up front, if people are really interested in this topic, please check out the website and other resources that I've posted online, because there's just like dozens and dozens of memos going back and forth between the FBI offices, the attorneys involved, all this other stuff. And it gets way more involved. It's so down in the weeds that like you're not going to care. But if you do care, like I posted online, it's out there. This really causes the FBI to freak out, as you'll see. But we're going to talk about the IRS as well.
Of course.
The IRS had been actively investigating Frank Balistrary for years. It seems like they really stepped that up in around 1961 when they started using mail covers to track his expenses and securing affidavits from people who were familiar with his dealings. They were building a case based on what was called the net worth expenditure method of tax fraud, which is the same thing they did with Al Capone.
Okay.
Which is like, okay, if I do tax evasion and like I turn in my taxes and it doesn't match up with like my W-2s, that's easy.
Right.
The net worth expenditure method is when they actually see how much money you spend on a yearly basis. And they're like, you are spending far more than you claim you're getting in. So it requires a lot more work on their part, but that's the way you would have to do it if the money you're bringing in is not coming in legitimately.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how they're doing this. And as part of this, they're doing a mail cover. And for people who don't know, a mail cover was, and probably still is, a method where the IRS, the FBI, whoever, would ask the post office to take copies, like Xerox copies of your mail, and set those aside. Trick being, it's only the envelope.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask.
They don't open it up. They don't open it up. So as far as I know, like there's no reason they couldn't still do this, because they're not actually
breaking the law.
They're not opening the letters. They're not doing a search. They're only copying what is publicly visible. So I can't see why they wouldn't still do this. But anyway, that was kind of what they were doing, is seeing who he was getting mail from to kind of indicate where money was coming from.
And it's funny because now that you say that, it's really funny that because it would be really easy to do that now, because I believe I've seen people that have like a UPS or a USPS app on their phone or something like that, and they can actually be, when their mail is delivered, it will send them pictures of everything that they delivered, so know you got your, you know that what the postman says he dropped off is actually what was dropped off.
Okay.
So they're keeping all that now in a database. So
oh wow.
So the government can just go in and pull it whenever they want.
I didn't realize that, but yeah. So that's what a mail cover is. That's pretty much minimally intrusive. Like, they're not actually opening or Xeroxing or X-raying anything inside the envelopes.
So do you have any insight on okay, so they get all pictures of all these letters, and are they just looking for basically, okay, it looks like you probably paid money to this company.
Mm-hmm.
Is that essentially what they're looking for? And then they contact that company to get further information, or?
That's kind of, in this specific case, there were things where he was getting money, or not necessarily money, but he was getting letters from scrap companies and sending things back out to scrap companies. And the trick is that they were not going to his residence. They were going to the address of one of his nightclubs, which they already thought that was weird that it was going there. They looked into it, and they were able to get affidavits from people that he had ownership, not on record, but ownership in like these scrap metal companies and aluminum processing companies. So they started out with the mail cover, and from there they started asking people, why is he getting mail from these places? It's an unusual place to get mail from.
Interesting. So, and is this a lot of like what he's getting in trouble for is that he had a lot of investments in company that were just silent. Nobody knew about it.
Yeah. I mean, basically, because when they're finding out that he's spending far more, like in one case, like they talked to a guy who's like, yeah, he came and he bought a Cadillac, and it was like a couple $1,000 he paid me in cash. And that in itself is not illegal, but then they're like, okay,
but that's half.
That's
half his salary for the or wages for the year or something.
Yeah, for what he's claiming per year, he should be, getting like a 5-year loan or something. He shouldn't be able to slap down cash on something. So, the more they talk to people, the more they're like, he's dealing in sums that are bigger than he should be able to do. Mm-hmm. All right. So January 1965, Frank and his bookkeeper, Jenny Aliotto, who is both his wife's cousin and allegedly his girlfriend.
And John's daughter?
No.
No? Okay.
No.
Okay, sorry.
No, his wife is John's daughter.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Yeah. So they were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of tax evasion. They were arrested and released on $5,000 reconnaissance bond. Balestrieri had 135 overt acts of impeding collection and 2 counts of fraudulent returns for the years of 1959 and 1960. They claimed that he had paid $19,200 less in taxes than he should have, which for 1960, that's a pretty good chunk of money.
Yeah, it sounds like a huge chunk of money.
Yeah. They claimed that he had set up businesses in fictitious names with dummy officers and had a double set of books to run these businesses. So they were like, yeah, you're doing like all the things. He was arraigned, he pleaded not guilty, and trial was set for later that year. Jenny Aliotto tried to get a separate trial from Frank Balestrieri. She thought that being in the same trial with him would be prejudice against her. I think she's probably right, and the judge agreed, so they did end up splitting that. So Frank had an office on North Downer Street, and he left that office on August 14th, 1965. At that time, while moving out, he claimed that he removed some wood paneling that he had installed when he moved in. That in itself is weird, that they moved into an office, installed wood paneling, and then when he moved out of the office, he took the wood paneling with him. Seems like a weird thing to do, but whatever. And while doing that, he found a recording device behind the wood paneling that connected to a phone line, and that phone line ran to a nearby telephone pole outside of the building. With him at the time of discovery was his son and another guy named Carl Dentis. Now, an internal FBI memo actually says we never planted a bug here, so we don't know what's going on with this. They suspected that the IRS had planted that bug. They're like, we planted bugs on him. We had 3 other bugs going on this guy, but that wasn't one of them.
That's great.
So they suspected it was the IRS. And I think that's probably true, but we may never know because the IRS is the worst government agency to get records from. So I will probably never see that.
Is it legal for the IRS to bug somebody?
No.
Okay. But again, like back in these days, right? All agencies were bugging people, and it was technically illegal.
It was illegal for the IRS. It was illegal for the FBI. None of them were supposed to be doing it.
Yeah, but everybody was doing it.
Yeah. At the same time he's preparing for his federal tax trial, the state tax authorities are also trying to investigate him too. They're not very happy. They tried to collect taxes from one of his businesses, Continental Music. They couldn't find anybody there. Every time they went to the place, nobody answered the door. The business was in the name of a man named Frank Bell, who they were pretty sure it was Frank Ballesteri, but they couldn't really prove it, and nobody by the name of Frank Bell ever showed up. So they're like, I don't know. So discovering this bug, whether it's FBI, IRS, whoever it is, this throws his whole tax case into a mess. In April 1966, the U.S. attorney calls the FBI agent in Milwaukee and said that Ballesteri's defense attorney, Maurice Walsh, expressed concern that the FBI had hidden microphones. He's like, that's not legal. Like, you can't be doing that. And the FBI agent's like, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It wasn't us. Fine. I guess that's okay. So they're still moving ahead. The U.S. attorney's like, okay, we'll move ahead. We'll move ahead with this tax trial, but you better not have anything to do with this bug.
Okay.
In May of 1966, the trial is still kind of slowly moving through. Hasn't even really got started yet. It's doing the motions and all that. Frank files to have his federal tax case moved from Milwaukee to Springfield, Illinois, on the grounds that the newspapers in Madison, Milwaukee had too much negative publicity and he couldn't get a fair trial in Milwaukee. Which, again, I honestly think that's fair.
Yeah, that's probably very true.
So, part of this is always like, how long can you delay your trial? But that's a fair one, I think. It's like, they're already like blatantly saying like, oh yeah, this guy runs the mob. Like, okay, yeah. Yeah, they said that the press in Milwaukee was hostile and would make a fair jury impossible. They also had trouble with the judges who were in Milwaukee. One judge was opposed to having long trials, and they were like, we're going to need this to be a long trial, so we can't have him sitting here. Another judge was over the hill and unpredictable in his actions, so they didn't want him as their judge. This is literally what they said, over the hill and unpredictable. The third judge was John Reynolds, and he couldn't even hear the case at all, because prior to being a judge, he had been the state attorney general, and he had already been actively fighting cases against Frank Ballesteri.
I feel like we did a podcast with him.
I'm sure his name's come up.
Yeah, because that name sounds real familiar.
Yeah. So they're like, our Milwaukee judges aren't even like guys we want. And the government actually, again, kind of agreed. So they ended up handing the case off to a man named Judge Omar Poos, Poos, Poos. And maybe that's not how you say his name, but I don't know how else to say that. And they moved it to Springfield, Illinois. So, again, I'm all in favor of this. I think that was the right decision. They asked the government attorney, at this time it was Frank Gimbel, if he'd be ready to go when the trial started in Springfield. He said, I got 750 exhibits, I've got 130 witnesses, and I'm ready to go. He was just awesome. While preparing, Frank Gimbel tried to get the original mail covers that we had talked about in the beginning that he needed for the trial. He determined that the IRS had only like carbon copies, not the original copies. And he suspected that the FBI had the original copies. So he asked them, and the FBI is like, yeah, we also had mail covers running, but we just destroyed them. We get them, we write down notes, and we destroy them. And they suspected that what probably happened is because the IRS and FBI had both requested mail covers. What the post office had done was made the copy for the FBI, then carbon copied it, which is like the cheap copying kind of thing for the IRS. And so they said, from here now on going forward, like, make real copies for both, because the IRS and FBI don't know that the other one is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And now it doesn't look good that the IRS copies are not the originals, even though, the originals are copies, but, not the original copies.
Mm.
So, like, now it's like, okay, well, where's the originals? That's the whole side issue, but just, like, all these weird minutia things that come up in trying to prosecute this. Trial's about to start, and right before it starts, Frank Balestrieri meets with Frank Zito, who was the mafia boss in Springfield, Illinois. Yes, there's the mafia in Springfield, Illinois. Zito says there's nothing he can do for me. He goes, federal court, I got no influence there. You're on your own. Sorry, man. In an interview with Mary Spicuzza, published in January of 2024, Frank Gimbel, the government attorney, said that on his drive to Springfield, he stopped at a restaurant in Peoria and received a call from his superior informing him of the illegal wiretaps. This was the first that he had heard of it.
This is Frank you're talking about right now? Or
Frank Gimbel, the prosecuting attorney.
Okay.
Too many Franks in the story, I know. And so apparently the defense had known about this for a little while, but they never bothered to tell the prosecutor about it. Knowing that this could completely crush his case, Gimbel apparently fainted right there in the restaurant.
Wow.
But he was determined to go ahead with the case. He said, we're going to make it work. We're going to make it work. That story had apparently never been told until Mary had interviewed him this last year. Which also, good for Frank Gimbel for still being around. Because this is like over 60 years ago. So he's holding on well. The first day of trial was October 17th, 1966. Defense attorney Maurice Walsh filed a motion to suppress the information gathered by hidden microphone in the tax case, as you would. Mm-hmm. Because if you received information from a microphone that was illegal, you can't use that information. As far as the suppression motion goes, this kicked off a lot of internal memos in the FBI. They're sending things back and forth, talking about, we don't want this going public. If this goes public, it might make people aware that we've done this in other cases. We've got these bugs on Balestrieri, but he's not our only guy. We're doing this everywhere. They're like, this is not good.
So are they not even hiding the fact that they have these bugs, or is this just because these were internal memos that...
These are internal memos. These were not public.
So that they can be a little more open about the fact that they actually have them, because...
on the inside, they'd say whatever. Mm. And so there's memos that go back and forth, and they're already pretty open, but then they've got a second layer of internal memos called June mail. I do not know why it's called June mail, but they have these memos, and they write the word June on the top, like the month of June. Mm-hmm. Don't know what that means, but they write that on there, and that's like an extra level of inside stuff, and it typically refers to things that they're not supposed to let other people know that they're doing.
Okay.
So If it says June, that's usually a sign that you're going to see something that the FBI was doing a little,
and
little
they would
shady.
openly talk through these memos about having bugs on people.
Yeah.
Even though it was completely illegal to do that.
Yes.
Wow. That's ballsy.
Yeah.
They must have really felt good about the security of the June mail system or whatever it was.
They did, but also here's the catch. So this is 1966. The Freedom of Information Act didn't really get kicked off until the 1970s.
So they're still in the mindset that nobody's ever going to see any
Right.
of this.
These memos, in their mind, unless an agent like walks out of the building with them, nobody's ever going to see it.
Mm.
So they're operating under a completely different mindset of where these memos are going to go.
And that makes complete sense.
Like today, I don't know if the FBI does shady things today. I have no opinion on that one way or the other. But there's no way they would write it down like this anymore.
Right.
Yeah, so they were concerned. They didn't want the FBI to be embarrassed. It's always is like the word the FBI uses. We don't want to be embarrassed. They also knew the bugs were illegal. On top of the bugs being illegal, they were like, well, the way that they were installed is illegal because we'd have to break into a building to do it. So we don't really want that. They were afraid that the defense attorney was going to get all this public one way or another. And they were not a fan of Maurice Walsh. They would consistently refer to him as completely unsavory. Like, just...
And this is the defense or the prosecutor?
Well, this is in the FBI memos.
Right, but who is Maurice Walsh?
Oh, he's the defense.
He's the defense?
He's the defense.
Okay.
They said he's a very knowledgeable and capable attorney, but yeah, he's just a slimy guy. We don't like him. Now, I don't know if he's a slimy guy or not, but he's absolutely doing the thing you should be doing if you're the defense attorney. Like, it's not his fault that there's these bugs.
They probably just don't like him because they're calling the FBI. He's calling the FBI out on what they're doing illegal, you know?
Yeah, so they were discussing this internally, and they were like, okay, maybe we should just kind of talk to the judge and get a little bit of this out there on the record before the defense makes it public. It'll look better for us if we say, yep, instead of us having to deny it and then be proven wrong.
And then go back up on it.
Yeah. But I'm like, okay, we'll see if we can get just a little bit out without revealing everything. The attorneys at the FBI, still internally, they fear that although the judge had basically blocked the defense from talking about certain bugs not related to the case, he was afraid that questions that would be brought up by the defense would get people to mention them on the stand. He felt sooner or later that Walsh would get to the point where the FBI would have to testify, and they'd once they're on the stand, they can't lie. They'd have to be like, well, yeah, I had this bug, but I also had this bug. And he's like, okay. The top people at the FBI thought it was undesirable to have agents testify, but if it was the only thing possible to prevent a mistrial, he's like, maybe we can get them to submit affidavits. We don't want them to testify, but we can get them to like release some information. And there's just a lot of back and forth internally. J. Edgar Hoover writes memos on the memos. Like he writes these little handwritten notes.
Yeah.
And like on one of them he writes, in any event, I want true and full facts presented. I want no coaching of our agents nor any ex-agents. Which that's a surprisingly nice thing for Hoover to write.
Because normally he's just blasting people.
He's just blasting people. But in this case, like he's like, if they are going to testify, I want them to be honest. Which, you know, good on him for that. Internally, they're talking. They said, well, the judge has a very healthy respect for the FBI. There's no way he would allow any embarrassing questions to go forward. And then Hoover writes on that, he goes, if only the IRS had much of a healthy respect for the FBI. Like, just randomly throwing that out there. If the issue of them having to trespass or break in were to come up, agents were advised to testify that Attorney General Bobby Kennedy had specifically requested the microphones to be planted there, which is not technically true.
Well, and how does that somehow, if they're doing somebody else's, if somebody gave the command, does that exonerate them from it?
It doesn't make it right, but it's, again, the FBI doesn't want to be embarrassed. So they're like, if it really comes down to saying that you had to break in, just blame it on the Attorney General. Be like, don't ever say it was Hoover that told you to do it. And the catch here is Bobby Kennedy had told them do whatever they had to do to crack the Tony Burnett case, this 1963 Kenosha kidnapping and murder case. They're like, do whatever you got to do to solve this case, because he was getting major political pressure on it. Now, he never explicitly said, do whatever you have to do. Break into buildings and plant bugs. Like, that wasn't what he said. So they're using this phrasing very loosely to cover their butts here.
Okay.
I think that Bobby Kennedy's still alive at this point. I think if they had asked him, when you say do whatever you have to do, I think he'd be like, well, I didn't mean that.
He's like, I needed to specify do what you need to do that's within the laws of our country.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So it's a...
Details, right? Details.
Yeah. So the FBI is, okay. Some of the FBI agents are being called to testify. The trial's not even like really kicked off yet. They're still like in this whole motion stage, trying to decide what will and won't be allowed to go forward. The defense is trying to call the FBI agents. The FBI doesn't want the FBI agents to testify. They're kind of like, okay, we'll let a couple people go, just the bare minimum. And like each time it's like the defense is asking for more, the FBI is fighting it, but each time the FBI has to give in just a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
An internal memo on October 19th says they wanted to clarify while they're talking about this, like, well, this is what I just kind of said. Bobby Kennedy didn't really ask for the microphones per se. He just asked for an increased investigation. So he's like, but just word it that Kennedy wanted whatever. He goes, we took that as a general authorization. And then Hoover writes on there, he goes, I want to see the memos where I approve these microphones. He's like, did I approve these microphones? Hoover doesn't even remember that he agreed to all of this, but he totally did.
So you have documents that show him approving this, or are you just assuming that he...
No. He's got the memos that like had the bugs installed.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was totally like from the top down.
Okay.
John Holtzman, FBI agent, testifies. Defense Attorney Walsh asked him if there was trespass involved in planting the microphones. He said before he answered that question, he'd have to plead the Fifth Amendment. He couldn't answer if there was trespass involved or not. The court recessed a moment, and the attorneys met in the judge's chambers. The government pointed out that Holtzman was now a magistrate in Peoria, Illinois. He was a retired FBI agent. So this would be embarrassing to him if he had to admit that he was breaking the law. Well, he's now basically a judge.
There's a whole lot of like, hold on, we got to take a break here because we might embarrass somebody, you know?
Yeah. So in the judge's chambers, they came to the conclusion, they're like, well, the government basically already said there had to be trespass involved to install the microphones. So there's really no need to ask every individual agent to repeat whether there was trespass or not. Defense Attorney Walsh goes back to Balestrieri, asks him, and Balestrieri says, okay, we can drop the line of questioning, it's fine. They got Holtzman to say that in addition to him, 22 other FBI employees had monitored the microphone at one time or another.
Wow.
So this is how secure this microphone is. This hidden bug has had up to 23 people listening in on it.
So basically, it was just like the radio sitting in the office, and it's like, hey guys, you want to hear what the Mafia's up to this week?
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, so they were like, okay, this isn't good on them. Hoover writes an internal memo. He goes, I still don't know why the IRS starts cases where microphones have been used when all they have to do is check with FBI first to ascertain such usage. It looks to me as if the IRS is constantly putting the FBI on trial instead of the hoodlums. This is a stupid note. Like, oh, we're going to bring an IRS case. We should check with the FBI to make sure they didn't do anything illegal before we bring this to court. Like, no, dude, just like, don't do illegal things. Like, that's so weird that Hoover's got to write this note being like, if they just checked with us.
He's a mafia guy. At least of course we're doing illegal things to him.
The whole thing is so dumb, too, because if the goal is to arrest and convict these guys, and Hoover basically knows you can't bring a tax case against him because we've got illegal bugs, he's hampering the very way that you're supposed to bring these guys down. So it's dumb. It's so dumb. So after this all starts coming out. They're like, okay, this is looking worse and worse. And the judge gives them an option. They're like, okay, you've got two different parts of this case here. You've got a conspiracy aspect of the case, and you've got the really narrow tax charges. He goes, I would recommend you drop the conspiracy part of this and just stick with the really narrow tax charges. He goes, we could probably avoid all this bug stuff then, because like you're not relying on that for your information. You know, it's strictly a numbers thing. If you can show your numbers in court, you can do the tax thing. Mm-hmm. And really, there's no evidence that anything picked up on these microphones was used in this case because it was an FBI bug and it's an IRS case and the FBI didn't share it with the IRS. So there's no evidence of that. Mm-hmm. But the only way for them to prove that nothing in it was used is for the FBI to release the logs, like the handwritten transcripts of these to the defense. Okay. And they definitely don't want to do that. You know? Because the defense would be like, well, yeah, you both work for the Justice Department. You just handed over this information to the IRS. And they'd be like, no, we didn't. But like now, like, okay, show us. And they're like, well, we don't want to show you. Because we don't want to show you what we've been writing down this whole time.
It's crazy.
Of course, the federal government decides they're going to go forward on the tax charges. We're like, so probably reduce the need to have the FBI testify at all because the FBI has nothing to do with taxes. Probably fine.
Any other charges that they didn't move forward on were what? Conspiracy?
Yeah, conspiracy. Basically, like how other people were involved in helping him, like, do these tax fraud things.
So it probably would have caused more people to get arrested?
Not necessarily arrested, but
in trouble in some way.
But they would call other people who worked for him or things like that. And that's where the bugs would really come into play. Because if the bugs picked up him having conversations with other people, and during that conversation they were talking about, oh, we did this, and this. Not even necessarily something illegal, but just, showing the kind of money they were bringing in. Like, that would work against them.
Yeah.
And again, like, the FBI bugs were never designed for tax purposes, to go after tax fraud. That wasn't what the FBI was even looking for. Mm-hmm. But because it's now come out that they existed, this whole thing was just a mess. Hopefully this is making sense. Like, it's not that complicated, but it's kind of complicated because there's multiple agencies involved. They get tax agent Frank Provenzano to testify. He says he'd met Balestri years before in the federal building and helped him falsify his net worth. Balestri allegedly gave him some penciled figures saying his net worth was such and such amount, and then Provenzano then typed these up and inserted them into the government's records, just taking Balestri's word for it. Years later, Balestri would allege that this meeting never happened, and he claimed that Provenzano, who happened to be gay, was blackmailed by the IRS into making up this story. And we've mentioned Provenzano. This is a long time back we did.
I recognize that name.
But
yeah.
we've mentioned him in the past. And the other thing has been used against him that apparently Balistrieri was kind of blackmailing him and making him do things because he was gay. I don't know if either is true.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of them is true, I don't know which one it is. But both sides are claiming that they're using him to do things for the IRS that he's not supposed to be doing, which is certainly possible because at this point in time, 1960s, if you were outed as gay, you could lose your federal job. Lose just about any job, really. I don't know what the federal rules were, but even in the state of Wisconsin, I mean, prior to the 1980s, you could get fired for that. So
That is such a shame, huh?
You and I are lucky enough that like we've grown up and not really had to realize that.
Yeah.
People even like 10 years older than us, like now neither you or I are gay, but like it is. Imagine that's like you lose your job for that.
Yeah.
It's nothing to do with your job.
Absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yeah. It's a weird thing to fire somebody for. Like, I don't know. They kept trying to call more FBI. The defense kept trying to call more FBI agents, and the FBI at this point was shutting them down. They're like, "Come on, this is nonsense. Like, we've already dropped this part of the case. This is obviously a fishing expedition on your part, and it would create an undue burden because at this point now, the agents who were in Milwaukee, one's in Detroit, one's in Kansas City, one's in New York." We can't just call these guys on a whim. Like, we're not going to get all 23 people to show up and start testifying, especially when they're all going to say the same thing anyway. This is pointless. On November 3rd, 1966, IRS agent Reginald Jackson testified that the IRS had been issued orders to be armed, which was very uncommon. The reason for this was because they had received a tip that somebody would try to break into the IRS office and steal papers related to Frank Balistrieri. To prevent this, agents were armed and even stayed in the office on a Sunday, as well as given a license plate to be on the lookout for. Apparently, this was the license plate of the guy they were suspecting was going to show up and steal things out of the office. Jackson had received the tip from another IRS agent, Ernest Johannes. When asked who told Johannes, Jackson was told, "The less you know, the better."
That was obtained illegally as well,
Yeah.
I'm guessing, huh?
Johannes was called to testify and claimed to be unaware of any of this. "I have no idea what this relates to at all," he said. Jackson's testimony was read back to him, and now Johannes recalled that he had received the tip from an FBI agent named John Gassaway. The suspected break-in was going to be perpetrated by an IRS employee who had since left the service, but still had access to the building. Johannes did not publicly say who this suspect was, but he said the armed agents had the man's license plate number and were on the lookout for his car. Regardless, the break-in apparently never happened, and no records were stolen. Again, I don't know what's going on here, like how credible this threat is. But apparently the FBI caught wind that somebody was going to break into the IRS office and steal these documents. So the IRS agents, who are not normally carrying guns on them, had to patrol the office with guns during the course of this tax trial.
This is so insane.
Yeah. Milwaukee's sound-trained agent, whose name is redacted in the records, I could probably figure it out, but I don't know offhand, was called to testify about the surveillance on Balistrieri. The defense asked probing questions, but the agents in charge, they said, again, this is not a fishing expedition. Keep it strictly narrow to the tax stuff. And everybody agreed that the agent made an outstanding witness. The acting attorney general also advised the FBI that the agent was an excellent witness with his firm, decisive answers. Balistrieri's tax case was temporarily adjourned on November 4th for 10 days. While they were kind of deciding how to move forward with this, there were a lot of adjournments throughout the course of this because this stuff just keeps coming up of like, can we keep moving forward with this or not? While it was adjourned, a man named Oscar Rohr, who was the Milwaukee jeweler who had testified at trial about selling a ring to Frank's son, reported to the U.S. attorney that his rear tire appeared to be slashed during the trial, and he suspected a friend of Frank's had done it. However, without any more evidence beyond the tire, no further investigation was made into the claim. Internally, the agents think that this Rohr guy is nuts because, he had already, claimed burglaries in the past and other things, and he was really paranoid about, the Italian community not liking him. And that's his words, not mine.
Mm-hmm.
The Italians in Milwaukee hate me. So they're like, somebody might have slashed your tire, but you can't say Frank did it unless you, have
some sort of evidence.
Yeah, show us something.
And the Italians don't like me is not enough evidence.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's obviously it's poor timing that it happened while you were testifying at this trial, but you need more than that. November 7th, while the case is recessed, an internal FBI memo suggested the idea of transferring more FBI agents from the Milwaukee office elsewhere. He goes, the more agents we move out of Milwaukee, the less likely they're going to be called to testify. He goes, then every time that they try to call somebody, we can just claim, well, they're not in Milwaukee anymore. He goes, this would, for one, on the federal level, it would be, a better defense that, it's going to be too expensive and stuff to move these guys around. But also, if anything happens on the state level, they're completely free and clear. If you are out of state, you can't be compelled to testify in a state trial. He goes, so just in case something comes out of this on the state level, we'll be covering our butts in advance.
Nice. Not shady at all, government.
Yeah. They wanted to continue to fight having any agents testify at all, and Hoover agreed. And really, there is, again, some legitimacy to this. Based off the idea that the IRS case was not tainted by the FBI bugs, there really isn't a reason for the FBI to be testifying at all. But as I said before, unless you show what the FBI actually caught on the bugs, the defense doesn't know that it's not tainted.
Mm-hmm.
So, the FBI can't win here. There was a memo sent on November 10th, 1966, again during this recess, about a conference held with the IRS top people. It was determined that the defense would keep trying to call more FBI personnel, but it wouldn't change the outcome of the tax trial. Hoover made a note in the memo, this is still just a fishing expedition. What's interesting about this is that Walsh is trying to get the case tossed, obviously, because he's the defense attorney,
mm-hmm.
and improper things he thinks were used to get this tax information. But I also think that there is some legitimacy to the FBI's concern about what he's trying to do. I do think there is some fishing expedition going on here. But again, I'm not mad at Walsh about this. It has nothing to do with the tax case. But if he's revealing that the federal government is abusing their powers, I don't fault him for that.
Yeah,
it's not relevant to the tax case, but if you have the opportunity to get these guys to testify that they did it, I'd say, yeah, okay, you should do that.
We want to know that they're planting illegal bugs on everybody.
Yeah, so okay, I get where Hoover's coming from, but generally speaking, I'm not mad at this guy about this.
Yeah, and I don't think Hoover really, he did something illegal. He doesn't really have much to say, I just wish they would let this bug thing go. Well, then stop breaking the law,
That's the weird thing, is he never accepts the fact that, he and his agency is the problem.
yeah, you're the one that broke the law.
Yeah. Yeah, why is the FBI on trial here? Well,
because you broke the law.
Yeah, dude. So they were supposed to go back to trial November 14th, but then as soon as they got back, the trial was recessed yet again because a juror was sick. It was supposed to be started up again a couple days later, giving the juror a few days to recover. But then defense attorney Maurice Walsh suffers a heart attack, a coronary thrombosis, and he was hospitalized. It was expected that he would not be able to defend Bellstreet for at least a few weeks while he recovered. In response to this, Judge Poos postponed the trial for 90 days, pushing it off again until March 1st, 1967. So we haven't really even got going with the trial yet.
And remind us all, when did this start?
The charges first came down in early 65.
Okay. And we're up to what, 67 now?
The trial will really get going in March 67.
Okay.
Yeah. So this, I really like, I hope people followed along here. Like, there's a lot of stuff, and I was kind of skimming it so it didn't get too dry. The IRS brings this tax case. During the course of the tax case, the defense finds out about this bug, partially because apparently there was something behind wood paneling.
Yeah, some custom wood paneling they had installed.
And through basic questioning, it suddenly is found out that, oh, not only is there this bug, you've got dozens of people listening in on this bug. So, like, everybody in the FBI knows about this. And even though it probably has nothing to do with the IRS case, and I will say that based on the records I've seen, I don't think the FBI gave anything to the IRS. I think if whether there was a bug or not would not change this IRS case whatsoever. But still, the defense doesn't know that, and it doesn't look good. So you have to kind of like make sure everything is clear, the evidence isn't tainted, and in the process, the FBI gets increasingly embarrassed. I sort of avoided it because we're going to cover this next time, but I said that the FBI had 3 bugs.
Okay.
2 bugs were directed at Frank Balistrieri. One was the one in his office. The second one was the one at his bookkeeper's place. They didn't really care about the bookkeeper, but that was just kind of, to follow him. The third one was in his attorney's office. And that is a major no-no.
Wow.
I mean, they're all illegal, but that's the one that's really going to get them in some trouble.
You're bugging a completely innocent guy. He just happens to be the defense lawyer. Wow.
Yeah. So we'll focus on that part next time.
For the first thing that pops into my head when I listen to this, and this might be a better question for the end of it all, but you had mentioned at the beginning of this episode how they're trying Frank for the same thing that Al Capone was tried for.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm curious. So that's 2 pretty notable mafia members that's how they took him down, essentially.
Yeah.
So I guess my question for you is, in your opinion, did this case kill Milwaukee, or do you think Milwaukee was gone? It didn't matter whether Frank went to jail or not. Milwaukee was kind of fading at this point. The Milwaukee Mafia.
Okay. It might have been fading. I don't want to say that it was fading completely because the 70s are still going to be a big time. And this is definitely not what brings down the Milwaukee mob. Okay. This is going to end up basically being a hiccup.
Okay,
it's a big hiccup, but it's a hiccup.
Okay, I thought at one point in time you had said that once Frank went to jail, it was kind of just washed away after that.
Correct, but not this time that he goes to jail.
Oh, okay. There's another time.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
No. I mean, spoiler alert for people. I know this happened 60 years ago. Frank is going to go to prison for taxes, but that is not the thing that he goes to prison for that kind of ends things.
Okay. Because where I was going with that is that this seems like a vital tool for the government to take down mafias. Because obviously you're talking about Capone and we got 2 examples there, and I'm sure there's countless
others. It is. Yeah. I mean, later on, there's going to be the RICO Act, and the RICO Act then becomes the major tool. But up until that comes along, really, yeah, I think that's spot on. I think we think of the FBI as like the anti-mob federal government thing, which it is, but it's really the IRS that was doing like the brunt of the work actually taking guys down.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So the thing I find interesting about it, though, is that when you talked a little bit about what Frank was doing in this time and how they figured out, that things were off.
Yeah.
This seems like something that had Frank had the right people, he could have easily fudged the numbers to make it look like exactly what he was saying. But the way it's explained, it sounds like he made no effort. So it was very easy to uncover that he was spending way more money than he claimed to be making.
Yeah, I mean...
And I guess where I'm going with this...
He tries. I mean, and he'll say things like he had money, and the money was on loan from other people. He had taken out loans, which is a good defense. Because if you take out loans, you have more money than you brought in.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, yeah, I spent more money, but imagine how much money I owe people. Like, that's going to be kind of like how he defends it.
Which I guess I can see, but it just seems like the disparity was so great that's not really valid. But I'm just curious if he's not really making an effort behind the scenes to hide any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, had they done that, had they been smart about it, how would that have changed the mafia?
Oh,
If they never had the IRS angle to go after these people. So, I mean, we look at it from this perspective. Frank never goes to jail this time.
yeah.
Al Capone never goes to jail on his tax fraud.
Well,
How does that change this whole dynamic?
like I say, the Frank thing is basically a hiccup. It's a big hiccup, but it's a hiccup. Capone, I mean, that alters the entire history of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Because when Capone goes down, I mean, that's massive. Because the next couple of guys running things after him, not that they weren't, like, really good at what they were doing. There's still a mob in Chicago today. Obviously, it didn't cripple the thing. But they just didn't have the weight that he did,
Mm-hmm.
So that was a massive thing. Yeah, in Milwaukee, it's kind of a hiccup because he's still, for what he's going to end up getting for prison time, he's still basically kind of running things. It does create more disgruntledness. I don't know if that's the right word to use. This will probably not come up in an episode because there's really no way to build an episode around it. But there's always these rumblings from the older generation of the mob, like guys who are like 60 and older, and they're like, we're useless here. Like, you're not using us for anything. Yeah, we're kind of semi-retired, but we can still do things.
Mm-hmm.
And they get mad, and they're like, the FBI, or I keep switching the FBI and the mafia. That's a weird one. But they're like, yeah, the mafia's not what it used to be. Frank's kind of ruining it. And they start actively talking about taking him out. Like, they openly talk about this with each other, and they tell one of the informants this. They're like, we'll pay you to just shoot this guy. And then the informant, tells the FBI, he's like, well, I'm not going to do it. But, like, that's how mad they get. And they get increasingly mad as the tax case goes on, because they're like, this is the key moment where he should be stepping aside, and he's not.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, because while this is going on, nothing is happening. Like, nothing crime-related is happening, because we all have to keep a low profile. And if he just stepped aside, we could keep things moving. But he's made it all about him, so, So from the mafia's point of view, like, they hate this.
Right.
And they don't hate it because the IRS is getting him. They hate the way that Frank responds to it.
And the other thing I find interesting about that whole thing is that, I mean, what made these people, what was their reasoning for just not giving a crap about the taxes? Or do you think, is this stuff that normal people do all the time? It's just that they happen to target and go after them because they're mafia members and just uncover it all?
Well, there's definitely that. I think that's a big part of it.
Like, you think, like, what maybe Frank was a little bit worse than a lot of business owners, but probably just a lot of this is just what a normal business owner would do. They just never get in trouble because the IRS has no reason to go after them.
He's worse because he's purposely hiding that he owns things. Even his house, he ends up signing the mortgage over to another guy. Even though he continues to live there, he puts the mortgage in other people's names. he's doing everything he can to hide where his money is, where it comes from, where it goes. So, like, he's definitely worse than average. But, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if he did all the identical things that he did, but he wasn't, like, the mob boss, I don't know that the IRS would have tried half as hard, you know?
He
Because,
probably would have just skated through life just fine and never even gotten in any sort of trouble for it, basically.
yeah, like, this is, like, I was kind of looking into, like, tax evasion during putting this episode together, just in general, tax evasion stuff, you know, like you do. And
I like the like you do.
And yeah, and they're like, the IRS is, they're not stupid. They know that, like, the vast majority of people don't claim everything on their taxes. If people run an Airbnb, Airbnb rules is stupid as hell, I think. But, like, unless you make over $20,000 a year on Airbnb, you don't have to report it. That's $20,000. That's pretty good.
That has changed, though, actually.
Has it?
Yeah, that changed. Like, now it's like $600, I think.
Okay. But those were the rules. Like that's clearly directing people to be like, well, just stay under that amount.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that waiters and waitresses, bartenders, nobody reports their tips. You know, I'm sure somebody out there does, but almost nobody does.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not a secret that people don't report money if they don't have to report it. But, yeah, but Frank is, like, actively hiding it.
Yeah, and he's setting up shell companies and stuff like that. And that just tells me that, like, he's being strategic about cheating the government. And I don't think the average person is quite that strategic.
Right. And that's the funny thing. Like, while I'm looking into this tax evasion thing, like, the IRS is like, this is the official thing from the top. They're like, there's a difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance. Tax evasion is illegal. Tax evasion is you have income that you owe us that you did not pay. Tax avoidance is finding ways to not owe us the money. They're like, that's legal. And smart businessmen know how to do things with their money so they don't legally have to pay. You know, and us lowered income people might get pissed off about that and be like, you stupid millionaires paying, like, almost nothing on your taxes. Well, yeah, but they're doing it legally.
Yeah.
Like, that's not their fault.
That's the government's fault for having all these stupid loopholes that they can exploit.
Right. Like, yes, they're using the loopholes, but they're legal loopholes.
So there's going to be one more piece to this coming up?
As far as, like, the bugging part of it goes, yeah. I don't know how the tax part will wrap up. That'll roll into 1967. So we might have a break episode before we get back to that. But the next one will wrap up the bugging part, yes.
Okay. Very cool. So that's another great tax evasion story for everybody out there.
Yeah.
So, and we're getting closer to getting the guy in jail, maybe?
Oh, yeah. We're getting very close now.
So, do you got anything else, or should we wrap this episode up?
We can wrap this one up. I don't know. I think this stuff's super fascinating, but yeah, it gets down in the weeds. And even trying to follow all the memos is kind of tricky because they're sending so many back and forth within one day.
I can't even imagine how you even try to tackle that because it's probably just so much junk data. I don't know how I would ever be able to filter through it and pull out what's pertinent.
Yeah,
so,
thanks. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and most of it's just like it's so dumb because it's them covering their butts. You know, which I get it, but like the fact like that they wrote it openly. I mean, they didn't know it was openly, but now it's like openly like, oh yeah, let's write this all out on paper.
I just wonder how some of those people feel about knowing that people just have regular access to that at all at any time they want nowadays. So it's crazy.
Well, you get smarter about that.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't go back and undo the 20 years of, little notes you were putting on the side of memos that now everybody can read.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, but I don't like now that people are more aware. Now that the laws are different, people are more aware of it.
they're more sneaky about it.
Sure. Like, I don't know if I should say this. Like, this might not be appropriate to say, but like, I know like local police departments, if you like email them, a lot of times they'll respond and they'll be like, call me, and they'll leave their phone number. And like, it isn't because it's faster to call somebody. It's specifically because the email is a public record and the phone call is not a public record.
Oh.
So they want
trying-
to have it, because as soon as they send an email back to you, now everything you've discussed
is open.
I don't know who the hell would request it, but in theory they could. Whereas if you just say, call me, and then you call, you could talk for an hour and nothing you said is public.
Interesting. I guess that makes sense. And I mean,
Yeah. So,
Again-
so that's not to knock them. Obviously, a lot of what the police do should remain private for a good reason. But it's funny that like they've had to change the way they do things
Yeah.
because of that.
yeah, that's so funny. So, all right, with that, we'll wrap this episode up because, man, she's been going for a while.
Yeah.
But we will be back. Well, Gavin, where can people reach out if they have questions?
They
comments?
can email MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com.
Or MilwaukeeMafia.com and click on one of the millions of banners that we have, right?
Sure.
Pointing you to the email. So, and we will.
I don't know where those banners go.
We will be back next week with a Patreon episode, 2 weeks with a regular Mafia episode. We want to thank everybody for their continued support, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.